The night the HOA tried to get me arrested, the porch lights flickered like warning signals, and I swear, I could almost hear my late father's voice whisper, "Son, never let anyone steal your dignity." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because that same land they were calling private HOA property. It was my land, my father's legacy, the very place where I learned to walk, build, and believe. And these people were calling me a trespasser. I'm Daniel Cole, retired judge, widower, and son of a man who built this town brick by brick. The funny thing about small towns, everyone knows your name until a new HOA board takes over and thinks the rules make them kings. For years, my property sat quiet a few acres on Maplewood Drive, lined with oaks my father planted back in the 60s when he passed. I swore I'd keep this land alive, not sell it, not pave it, not let anyone erase his name. It wasn't about money. It was about memory. But new people started moving in, loud, proud, and nosy. They formed an HOA faster than you could say power trip. At first, I didn't mind. They promised safety, community, and beautification, until they started drawing lines literally across the neighborhood, including mine. One morning I woke up to find new signs posted near my gate. Private property, HOA members only. Trespassing subject to fines. I thought it was a mistake. So, I walked over to the next board meeting, old brown hat on my head, folder in hand, ready to clear things up. But as soon as I stepped through those clubhouse doors, I felt that heavy, judgmental silence. Every eye turned toward me like I was some outsider. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, HOA president, sitting at the head of the table, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Well," she said, tapping her pen. "Mr. Cole, you're not on the list? This is a members-only meeting." I smiled politely. "Karen, I've lived here since before this HOA even existed. I think I've earned a chair." "Technically, Judge Cole, your property was annexed into our jurisdiction after last year's boundary update, which means you're subject to HOA rules now." I felt the air leave my chest. Annexed. Without notice. Without consent? I opened my folder, pulled out an old deed, signed by my father himself, notarized in ink, faded with time. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "this land predates your association by 40 years. You can't annex something you never owned." She leaned forward. "Well, maybe you should have read the bylaws, sir. You're either in compliance or in violation." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because I'd seen this kind of arrogance in court too many times. People who confuse rules for rights. That night, I walked my property line with a flashlight, tracing the fence my father built with his bare hands. Every post, every nail, a memory. And I whispered, "They're not taking this from me, Dad. Not a single inch." But Karen and her board weren't done. They sent violation notices, fines, and warnings, all for trespassing on common areas that were, in truth, my own driveway. They even claimed my old barn was unauthorized construction. Imagine calling a man a trespasser on the soil where his name was written. Still, I tried to stay calm. I wrote letters, quoted law, offered to meet, but they wanted one thing: control. Then came the day everything exploded. It was a Sunday, quiet, peaceful. I was out by the barn, cleaning up tools, humming the same hymn my wife used to sing before dinner. Suddenly I heard shouting near the road. I turned and saw 2 HOA security guards, clipboard in hand, standing at my gate. Karen was with them, waving her phone like a badge. "Excuse me?" she barked. "You're trespassing on HOA land. You need to leave immediately." I froze, then laughed, shaking my head. "Ma'am, this is my property. I have every right to be here." She smirked. "We'll see what the sheriff says." And just like that, she dialed 911, told them there was a hostile trespasser refusing to leave HOA grounds. My own home. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed down Maplewood. My neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. Kids on bikes slowed down, wide-eyed, and I just stood there in my boots. On my soil, wondering how far ignorance could really go, 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. "Sir," one said carefully, "we got a call about trespassing. Can you show us ID?" I smiled sadly, reached into my jacket, and handed him my old judicial badge. "I can do better than ID, son," I said. "I'm Judge Daniel Cole, retired, and this land is mine." "Been in my family since 1963? The deputies exchanged a look. Karen's face went pale. One of them turned to her and asked, "Ma'am, did you verify ownership before calling this in?" She stuttered. "WL, the HOA records, ma'am," he cut in. "False reporting's a serious offense." Karen's lips tightened. She mumbled something about misunderstandings and stormed off, clutching her clipboard like a wounded soldier. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. Because after that night, the whispers turned to war. The HOA wasn't backing down. They filed a civil complaint, tried to seize a strip of my land, calling it common easement. It was the final straw. I'd spent my career fighting for justice. I'd defended truth in courtrooms and comforted broken families. But this was personal. They weren't just trespassing on my land. They were trespassing on my father's grave, my wife's memory, my dignity. So I did what my father always told me to do, son. When the law is on your side, stand firm, and let the truth be louder than the lies. I dusted off my books, opened my old files, and started preparing my own case. Not out of revenge, but out of principle, because no one, not even a power-hungry HOA, gets to rewrite history. Not mine, not my family's, not in this town. And as I looked across my land, the sunset spilling gold across those oaks, I made a promise. They wanted a fight? They'd get one. In the very courtroom where I once sat on the bench, they thought they could scare me with sirens and signs. But they didn't know. I'm the judge who built the law they're trying to twist. And next time, they won't be calling the cops. They'll be standing before me. The night after the cops left my driveway, I sat alone on my porch, the same porch my wife and I built together 40 years ago, watching the rain hit the old oak tree. Every drop sounded like a memory. Every flash of lightning reminded me what was at stake. This wasn't just land. It was home. And I wasn't going to lose it to a handful of bullies with clipboards. For the first time in years, I pulled out my old briefcase. Inside were the tools of my past life, law journals, property codes, case notes. They smelled like dust and justice. If the HOA wanted a legal battle, I'd give them a lesson in the law they'd never forget. But something told me this wasn't just arrogance. It was strategy. You don't falsify boundaries without help. Someone inside that board was covering up a land grab, so I started digging. The next morning, I drove down to the county records office. The clerk, an old friend named Marcy, looked up and smiled. "Well, if it isn't Judge Cole, what brings you down here?" "Trouble, Marcy," I said softly. "Seems the HOA thinks they own part of my land." Her smile faded. "Again, you Cole folks have held that parcel forever. What are they talking about?" "That's what I intend to find out." We rolled up the plat maps, one from 1963, another from last year, and there it was. A shifted boundary line. Just a few feet at first glance, but enough to swallow my front gate, driveway, and a corner of the barn. A silent theft drawn in ink. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Marcy frowned. "Says here it was adjusted under HOA jurisdiction request. Signed by a new surveyor, one who's not local." She paused. "Daniel, this doesn't smell right." "No," I said, eyes narrowing. "It smells like fraud." I copied everything. Deeds, plats, correspondence, drove straight home. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting behind the oak trees, painting the land gold. It was like my father was watching and waiting for me to finish what he started. Inside, I spread the papers across the dining table. And that's when I noticed something odd. A letterhead on one of the HOA forms. The surveyor's address matched the vice president's business. His name was Todd Whitmore, Karen's husband. And suddenly, everything clicked. I remember Karen's smirk at the meeting, the way she waved her pen like a sword. She wasn't defending rules. She was protecting a scheme, a private survey company, quietly shifting borders and expanding HOA control. More land, more power, more fees. My driveway wasn't a mistake. It was a target. That night I called an old colleague, attorney Linda Grayson, one of the sharpest minds in the state. We'd worked together on boundary disputes before. "Linda," I said, "how fast can we file for injunctive relief?" She didn't even pause. "For you?" "By morning." But I wasn't just going to fight back legally. I was going to teach them a lesson in accountability. The next day I walked right into the HOA clubhouse uninvited. Every head turned. Karen's face went white. "Mr. Cole, you can't just barge in here. I can when this meeting concerns my property," I interrupted. I set my folder on the table. Inside, copies of the original deed, the forged plat, and a photo of Todd's business license. Karen's hands trembled. "Do you want to explain?" I asked quietly. "How your husband's company redrew county maps without authorization?" Her lips parted. "To Todd handles his own affairs. The board I cut in, was misled, which makes you negligent, and him criminally liable." Gasps filled the room. One member muttered, "I told you this boundary thing was shady." Another whispered, "We could all get sued." Karen stood, voice shaking. "You can't threaten us." I looked her in the eye. "This isn't a threat. It's a court summons." By Friday, we filed suit, Cole versus Maplewood HOA, citing fraudulent annexation, trespass, and defamation. I requested a temporary restraining order to stop all HOA actions on my land, and the judge assigned. Judge Ramirez, an old friend who once clerked under me. When word spread, the town buzzed like a beehive. Neighbors stopped by with coffee, pie, even old photographs showing my fence line from decades ago. "Your daddy built that barn himself," Mrs. Lawson said, tears in her eyes. "Everyone knows it's yours." That support. It hit deep. Because when you're fighting for what's right, truth has witnesses. The court hearing came fast. The morning air was cold. I wore the same suit I wore the day I retired, not out of vanity, but out of respect. This wasn't just a case. It was closure. As we entered the courtroom, Karen and Todd sat at the defendant's table, whispering nervously. The HOA board sat behind them, uneasy. Linda glanced at me, whispering, "Let's end this." Judge Ramirez looked up. "Mr. Cole, you may proceed." I stood. "Your Honor, this isn't just about property. It's about truth, about the power of ink over integrity, about what happens when greed redraws history." I laid out the evidence, deed, plat, signature comparisons. Linda called Marcy as a witness. She confirmed the forged boundary, the falsified records, the conflict of interest. Then came the kicker. A county engineer took the stand and testified the survey had no official approval. It was never recorded by the county, meaning the annexation was invalid from day one. Karen's defense collapsed. Todd tried to argue clerical mistake, but Linda wasn't having it. "Mistake? You billed the HOA for survey fees from your own firm. That's fraud, Mr. Whitmore." By the time we finished, Karen's face was red as a sunset. Ramirez leaned forward, eyes stern. "Mrs. Whitmore, you called law enforcement on a lawful property owner. You filed unauthorized claims. And you allowed your husband's company to profit from forged maps. You've not only violated trust, you've violated the law." Then he turned to me. "Judge Cole, on behalf of this court, I apologize for what you've endured." I nodded, holding back emotion. This wasn't about pride. It was about peace. The gavel struck. Order granted. The HOA's claims were nullified, the boundary restored, all fines erased, and the Whitmores, facing civil penalties and potential criminal charges. But the best part? Ramirez appointed an independent monitor to oversee HOA operations, with me as advisor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same man they tried to have arrested was now overseeing their board. After court, neighbors gathered outside, clapping, some even hugging me. About time someone stood up to them. One man laughed. I smiled, looking at the courthouse steps. I'd walked those halls for years defending justice for others. Never thought I'd return to defend my own name. Karen and Todd walked by, silent. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. But then I remembered my father's words. Son, you can forgive ignorance, but you must confront deceit. That evening, I sat on my porch again. The oak trees rustled in the breeze. A quiet peace settled in my chest. The land was safe. The name was safe. The lesson was learned, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about my fight. It was about every honest homeowner bullied by arrogance. Every elder pushed aside by paperwork. Every voice silenced by policy. I thought, maybe, just maybe, it was time to do more. To help others stand up too. Asterisk, they drew their battle lines in ink. I redrew them in truth. But justice isn't just about winning, it's about restoring balance. And in part 3, they'll learn what real accountability feels like when the man they tried to silence becomes the one rewriting their rules. The day the judge's order came through, the wind blew strong like the town itself was finally exhaling after a storm that had hung too long in the sky. I stood by my father's oak tree, court papers in hand, staring at the line that mattered most. All claims by the Maplewood HOA are hereby void. It wasn't just ink. It was vindication. The same hands they tried to shackle with trespassing charges now held the gavel of truth. For the first time in months, I slept in peace. No more letters. No more threats. No more shadows. Creeping over fences that weren't theirs to cross. But justice doesn't end when the papers are signed. It begins. And I knew, deep down, this community needed healing. Not just from corruption, but from fear. Because what Karen and her crew had done wasn't just about me. They'd bullied single mothers for leaving toys on porches, threatened veterans over flagpoles, fined retirees for paint colors they didn't approve. They'd turned what should have been a neighborhood into a kingdom of intimidation. And it was time the kingdom fell. The court's monitor reached out a week later. Judge Cole, he said, we'd like you to serve as temporary community advisor. Help guide the HOA back to lawful operation. I almost laughed. Imagine me sitting in the same room where they tried to exile me. But maybe that's how healing begins. So I agreed. When I walked into the clubhouse again, it was quiet. No glares this time. Just weary faces, neighbors tired of conflict. Karen and Todd's chairs sat empty. They'd both resigned, pending investigation. The new interim president, a young mom named Rebecca, stood up and said softly, Judge Cole, we're sorry. We lost our way. I nodded. We all do, sometimes. But now's our chance to fix it. I walked to the front of the room, set my worn folder down, and spoke not like a judge, but like a neighbor. An HOA should serve people, not scare them. Rules mean nothing without respect. You can have the cleanest lawns in the county, but if folks are afraid to wave to each other, you've already lost the heart of your town. You could hear a pin drop, because they knew. Every word was true. I spent the next month helping them rewrite bylaws in plain English, not legal jargon. We removed fines for trivial things, restored rights to decorate homes, plant gardens, fly flags, and most importantly, we passed a property rights clause, one that made sure no future board could redraw lines without unanimous consent and county verification. For the first time in a long time, neighbors showed up to meetings not to fight, but to build. The tension faded. Children played on front lawns again. Flags waved proudly, and every time I saw someone smile, I felt my father's pride echo through those oak leaves. One evening, as I walked back from the clubhouse, I saw old Mrs. Lawson sitting on her porch swing. She waved me over. You did good, Danny, she said, her voice trembling. Your daddy'd be proud. I sat beside her, looking out over the road that once felt like a battlefield. I just wanted to make things right, I whispered. She patted my hand. You did, for all of us. But peace has its shadows. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the county. Karen and Todd were under official investigation, charges pending for fraud, falsification of documents, and false reporting. They'd fled town. Their house was up for sale, ironically, under a for sale by owner sign, not HOA approved. I didn't celebrate. Because justice isn't about revenge, it's about balance. And I hoped wherever they went, they'd learn that power built on deceit always collapses under truth. As the months rolled by, the land bloomed again. The barn, once labeled a violation, now hosted community barbecues. Kids painted murals on its side, trees, flags, a big golden gavel in the center. We called it Justice Hall. Fitting, I think. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I stood by his old fence, freshly mended, and laid a hand on the wood. "Dad," I said quietly, "we did it." They tried to take it, but we held the line. Soft breeze blew through the trees, and for a second, I swore I heard him laugh. That deep, warm laugh that always meant, "You did good, son." That night, I hosted a town dinner under the oaks. No suits, no titles. Just neighbors old and new, sharing food, stories, and forgiveness. Even folks who once sided with Karen came by, heads bowed, offering apologies. And you know what? I accepted every one of them. Because if you can't forgive, you're still chained to the fight. Rebecca raised her glass. To Judge Cole for teaching us that land without honor is just dirt, and laws without heart are just words. The crowd cheered. I smiled, humbled, because I hadn't done this alone. I'd just reminded them of who they were before fear took over. As the stars came out, I looked across the field, neighbors laughing, kids playing tag, porch lights glowing like old friends. And I realized something powerful. We hadn't just restored boundaries. We'd rebuilt trust. This wasn't about a judge winning a case. It was about a community reclaiming its soul. You know, folks ask me sometimes, was it worth it? All the stress, the courtrooms, the fights, and I tell them this. It's always worth it to stand for what's right. Not just for yourself, but for everyone watching. Because people learn more from how you fight than how you win, when you let fear and pride redraw your lines. You lose more than land. You lose who you are. But when you fight with truth and dignity, you reclaim more than property. You reclaim your peace. So here's what I learned, and maybe it'll mean something to you too. Respect doesn't come from titles. Honor doesn't come from bylaws. It comes from how you treat your neighbors, how you guard your family's legacy, and how you face injustice, not with hate, but with heart. Because someday, when you're sitting on your porch watching your grandkids play, you'll realize it was never about fences or flags. It was about home, and home is worth defending. So if you've ever had to stand up to an HOA, a Karen, or anyone who tried to take what's yours, share your story below. Because every voice matters. Every truth counts. And together, we keep our fences strong, our hearts humble, and our homes free.